Once you begin a project or project template, you want to ensure that the electrical settings are adjusted to match preferences and company standards. Revit has electrical settings which control a variety of analysis and graphic display settings. You can access the electrical settings by clicking the dialog launcher on the electrical panel. You can also access the electrical settings from the Manage ribbon in the Settings panel by expanding the MEP Settings drop-down. In this dialog, the various settings appear in the menu on the left in a tree structure. When you select a setting on the left, the available options populate in the panel on the right. The first settings are for hidden lines. Here, you can select whether or not to draw MEP hidden lines when objects cross in two-dimensional views. Then you can control the line style by clicking in the value field and expanding the drop-down. Additionally, you can control the inside and outside gaps along with the single line gap. Next, I'll click General to switch to those options. Here, you can enter a symbol for the electrical connector separator. When you click in the electrical data style value field, you can expand the drop-down and choose one of the options to meet your preference. Additionally, you can select one of the available circuit description options and then enter a character or text for any of the three circuit naming by phase labels. You can also click in the capitalization for load names value field and select From Source Parameters, Initial, Sentence, or Upper. In the wiring settings, you can specify the ambient temperature and the gap of wiring crossing. Then, the hot wire tick mark, ground wire tick mark, and neutral wire tick mark can be set to circle wire tick mark, hook wire tick mark, long wire tick mark, or short wire tick mark. Next, you can choose yes or no for the slanted line across tick mark setting. For when to show tick marks, you can select Always, Never, or Home Runs. Lastly, you can specify the maximum voltage drop for branch circuit wire sizing and the maximum voltage drop for feeder circuit wire sizing. When you select wire sizes, you can see information on the wire types available. The wire types are based on material, temperature ratings, and insulation type. Each combination of material, temperature rating, and insulation type is associated with a separate table of wire sizes. The default values cannot be modified. However, you can add a new material, temperature, or insulation type based on the default, and a new table of sizes will be created. You can also delete any of these. The table lists the ampacity, size, and diameter. The size is AWG or American Wire Gauge. Realize that you can create a new ampacity or delete an existing ampacity. You can also choose whether or not the size will be used by sizing. When selected, that wire size is made available for use in circuits where Revit calculates the wire size. When cleared, the size is not available for use with the sizing feature. When you select Correction Factor, you can enter a value for the correction factor at various ambient temperatures. You can select a material and temperature from the available drop-downs in order to view those correction factors. As you can see, you can create a new correction factor or delete a correction factor. When you select ground conductors, you can see the ampacity of wiring used to select the size of ground conductors for Revit. You can switch the material from the drop-down at the top. You can also create a new ampacity or delete an ampacity. When you select wiring types, the panel on the right shows a table listing the wire types that can be used in the project. You can add or remove wire types as needed. Next, I'll select Voltage Definitions. In this table, you can modify the existing voltage definitions by adjusting the value and minimum and maximum voltages, or by adding a new voltage definition. You cannot delete any of the default definitions, but if you create additional voltage definitions, you can delete them if needed. Similarly, for distribution systems, you can modify the existing definitions or add additional distribution system definitions as needed. The phase can be single or three-phase. The configuration can be set to Y or delta if it is three-phase. For wires, you can set the number to 3 or 4 with three-phase systems and 2 or 3 with single-phase systems. Lastly, the LL voltage can be set to any of the voltages listed in the voltage definitions to represent the voltage measured between any two phases, and the LG voltage can be set to represent the voltage measured between a phase and ground. For the cable tray settings, you can choose whether or not to use the annotation scale for single-line fittings, and then specify the cable tray fitting annotation size. The cable tray fitting annotation size controls the plotted size of fittings and accessories drawn in single-line views. It is also maintained regardless of the drawing scale. You can also enter a symbol to use for the cable tray size separator, cable tray size suffix, and cable tray connector separator. When you select Rise Drop under Cable Tray Settings, you can control the cable tray rise drop annotation size. Next, for single line symbology, you can control the rise symbol and the drop symbol. When you click in one of the value fields, a button becomes available. Click this button to open the Select Symbol dialog. Here, you can choose one of the available symbols. I'll click Cancel to close the dialog. For two-line symbology, you can control the rise and drop symbols as well. When you select Size under Cable Tray Settings, you can see the cable tray sizes and select whether or not they will be available for use in the size list when creating cable trays. Realize that you can add, modify, or delete sizes as needed. The same options are available for conduit settings as were available for cable tray settings. The sizing is different though, so let's take a look at the size settings under conduit settings. Here, you can see a much more detailed table showing the trade size, ID or inside diameter, OD or outside diameter, and minimum bend radius. Once again, you can select whether or not they will be available for use in the size list when creating conduit. Additionally, you can add, modify, or delete sizes as needed. However, realize that you can select a different standard from the drop-down. You can also add and delete standards as needed. When you select Load Calculations, there are two buttons and a checkbox. The Load Classifications button opens the Load Classifications dialog. Here, you can control the demand factor and select the load class for use with spaces for the various load classification types. I'll click Cancel to close the dialog. The Demand Factor button opens the Demand Factors dialog. Here, you can control the calculation method and calculation options for the various demand factor types. Once again, I'll click Cancel to close this dialog. The checkbox is to turn on Run Calculations for loads in spaces. As you can see, calculations of loads on spaces may slow system response. and you can turn off active calculations to improve performance. Finally, in the panel schedule settings, you can control the spare label and space label. You can also select whether or not to include spares in panel totals or merge multi-poled circuits into a single cell.